I'm a little bit starstruck today. I am very thankful to be talking to Professor Tim Noakes. Thank you so much for joining me on my little podcast.
Tracey, I'm the one who should be starstruck.
You're gorgeous. Well, I just wanted to start first by, I guess, personally thanking you. I guess you don't often get the chance to thank your heroes in life, and you are definitely a hero of mine and my husband's and my mum and all the people that, you know, I've been able to help because of you. So 6 years ago, you were the man that we found and, you know, turned our health around, and you know, I'll be forever grateful, and we've followed you, you know, obviously very intensely ever since, and I can't believe I'm sitting here looking at you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracey. That's very kind of you.
So your story is a very big story, both personally and professionally, and I was giving some thought obviously to what I wanted to ask you before we sort of came on. And you know, one of the things I've really learnt being in this space is that most of the people who are changing the language in the nutrition area are doing it because of a personal health story. So I know that is the case with you, and I'm just hoping you might be able to share a little bit of that with our listeners.
Of course. So I was famous for promoting the high carbohydrate diet for athletes, and I did it for 33 years. And I assumed that that was all correct and scientifically proven because I'd trained in cardiology in the 1970s. And that's what I worked with some of the leading people in South Africa. And that's what they told me. You had to stop eating the margarine and replace it. Sorry, stop eating the butter and replace it with margarine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I dutifully did that. My wife didn't, but I did.
Your wife didn't?
No, she wasn't interested.
Oh, smart lady.
Exactly. So I changed, and then I wrote this book on and did a lot of research on carbohydrates in exercise. And we became really knowledgeable about carbohydrates. And the beauty was it was so easy to study. You could trace where the carbohydrate was going in the body during exercise. And when people ingested the carbohydrate, we worked out exactly where it went. And so we knew exactly how many grams of carbohydrate you were burning every minute. And we thought we were tremendously clever. And so we said you must just eat as much carbohydrate as you can every day and you'll be a better athlete. And so it was this classic reductionism that you could explain everything on one variable. So it turned out that wasn't right. Anyway, fortunately, I also had my Damascene moment, and I didn't realize that I developed type 2 diabetes. My dad died of it. I watched him die of it over 10 years. And then suddenly I discovered that I changed my diet. And then I discovered that actually I had type 2 diabetes, and which I put in remission. But I'm actually living in borrowed time because my dad was sick for 10 years and died from the disease, and I've had it for at least 10 years. So I should already be in the grave, but fortunately I found this diet and that saved my life. I've no doubt about it. So that was my story. And you see, when I converted, I couldn't hide it because I was quite a well-known scientist in South Africa, and suddenly I was lean and athletic again. So people asked, what did you do? And I just said, well, I cut the grains and started eating lots of fat. And so eventually I started writing about it because now I realized I had to come out and say, listen, I was wrong, because I knew the advice would be hurting people who had read my books and where I'd said you must eat high carbohydrate diets. I knew that if they were insulin resistant, they would be in trouble. They might develop type 2 diabetes, as I did myself. So I knew I had to reverse it. So I started writing about it. And then I wrote a book called Challenging Beliefs. And then I said that the cholesterol theory is wrong. And I was wrong about nutrition, and one should reduce the carbohydrates in the diet. And I mentioned in passing that I didn't believe that statin drugs made any difference. And that was the red rag, because then my university tackled me. And over the next 4 years, they exposed me to a public humiliation or public degradation process. In other words, the entire university rejected me. And the first time it's ever happened at my university. It's one of the few times it's happened in the world, actually. And so I had to fight this. And eventually I was charged with giving wrong advice on Twitter. which was wrong because the advice I gave was perfectly correct. It's exactly what the South African Dietary Guidelines are. And so I went to court for 4 years, 28 days over those 4 years. And in the end, we won on every count. And we proved that it was a malicious prosecution, that the dietitians of South Africa had colluded with the professional body to charge me. And the professional body had spent 10 million rand trying to prosecute me, and they failed hopelessly. And they failed because we had the science and we presented the science, and that, in the end of the day, that won over. So it took me about a year, my wife and I, about a year to recover, and we've recovered, and we're in a fantastic space at the moment. And I've just realized how blessed my life has been. You know, I've just had this unbelievably happy, lucky life. And that this happened was, in fact, a good thing.
Wow.
It was hard when we were going through it, but it was a good thing, because I wouldn't be talking to you probably if it hadn't been for that trial. And I've now got another career. So I'm retired. I've been retired for 5 years, but now I sit and write and ponder the low-carb story and how we got it all wrong. And it's just a wonderful period of my life.
It's lovely. That's lovely. Wow. Well, I have to say, you've kind of answered all my questions that I had in that short space of time. Well,
I don't mind ask them again.
Actually, I wanted to ask you about your wife, because I know, and I've read that she was incredibly supportive when
Yes.
the university was attacking you, and she was kind of the one that really told you to. Yeah. Is that right?
Exactly. You see, I was told early on that what the CIA does when they try to expose someone, and the guy said, listen, the university and the Health Professions Council will do exactly the same to you. And what they do is they try to isolate you completely. So I was completely isolated from my university. I was considered a complete renegade, etc. I was the institute that I had started and the department that I had started also isolated me. So academically, I was completely isolated. At the same time, on social media, there was a social media campaign against me, which we're currently investigating to see whether it's coordinated. We have a very strong feeling that it was coordinated by individuals within the University of Cape Town.
Wow.
So, and then there was the media, the whole media. I couldn't wake up in the morning knowing whether my face would appear in the newspaper in some sort of derogatory statements. So this was going on the outside. And fortunately, I've known my wife for 53 years. We've been married for 49 years. And as she said, I've known you since when she was 15. She says, I know that you are not this person that they're trying to make out that you are. And we stuck it out. So what the CIA tries to do is they isolate you. When they've isolated you from everyone else, the only person you've got left is your wife. Now, if they can isolate you from your wife, you commit suicide. That's the only solution. And so we knew that had to have that. If that happened, there would be a disaster. And so that was it wasn't the reason we stuck together. We stuck together because we love each other. But we knew that we had to stick it out. Whatever happened, we had to stick it out. And, people ask, and I said, I never doubted that we would win. I knew that they could distort the process, in which case we'd go to the High Court. And the High Court would have thrown the case out within 3 hours because there was no case. It was completely fabricated. So I knew that even if we lost the case, we would win it ultimately and it would just mean another year or two that would progress. And I never doubted myself, and my wife never doubted myself, and she didn't doubt that I was right in what I was doing. So that's what got us through in the end.
Oh, amazing. So lucky that you had her. I mean, that is just so much worse than I think, from the outside here in Australia. I mean, obviously we weren't, privy to everything that was actually happening with you. But, I
might just add, there were other people, of course, they've got what I learned from this trial was that the good people come towards you and the bad people leave you. So, it's beautiful because now all those bad people, I never have to touch them again. But the good people come towards you. And there were 2 lawyers in my case who, I just cry whenever I talk about them because they really saved us. And the one was Dr. Rocky Ramdas, who's a medical doctor who became a lawyer just we're just brothers. We just had a fantastic time. And again, that was one of the beauties of this trial. We just met and we joined forces because we are identical human beings. And then there was Mike van der Nest, one of the senior counsel in South Africa. And they said they defended me because they knew it was wrong. They knew it was constitutionally incorrect what was happening. And they saw it from that side. And Mike van der Nest said, listen, Tim, I don't want you to lose your positivity. That's why I defended you. Because he could see that in the duress of the trial, I couldn't be as positive as I always was, because I was worried about what was going on.
And there were certainly dark forces against you. I mean, not just at the university, but, you know, I've read, and I don't know if it's hearsay or, you know, that there was some big industry behind, you know, this trial. You know, Coca-Cola's been thrown around and stuff like that. Is that something you're able to talk about, or? Oh,
well, I do, probably not wisely, but so there was another, one of the beauties of the trial was I got to know Greg Glassman, the man who started CrossFit. And Greg had phoned me years before the trial began, because he'd seen that I had exposed Pepsi Cola for what they did through their product Gatorade and how they distorted the science. And his company, CrossFit, were targeted by Coca-Cola and the American College of Sports Medicine and another organization, a training organization in the United States, who published false information about CrossFit. And he took them to court. And over 5 years, he finally won the case, which is ongoing. He was awarded $4 million. That was just to cover the cost of the trial. He's now getting compensation for what the effects of this negative publicity were for his company, because it was completely falsified. And he said, you're the only other person I know who's taken on industry and shown that they distort the science. So he sent out his investigative journalists to Cape Town, and they came and we chatted and they started looking into it. And then they found the International Life Sciences Institute, which is a front for Coca-Cola and for various other organizations, including the pharmaceutical industry, were involved. And the two primary prosecution witnesses were both former heads of ILSI in South Africa. Now, isn't that a surprise? And then the third thing was that the one dietitian, the department at the University of Cape Town of Nutrition received a big funding boost in 2015. That was exactly when my trial started. Why would they do that? And then one of them, then the professor of nutrition at the University of Cape Town assisted the prosecution's team. Now, I wonder why she did that. And it got even more bizarre, because one of the students was granted this award for being the top nutrition scientist in the whole world. She was granted this ILSI award at the University of Cape Town. So that's how they. Yeah.
So people need to know this stuff, you know. I think we go along in our day and, you know, we just blindly read and believe everything that we're told. But, you know, when you hear stories of like yourself, and then of course Gary Fettke, you know, what he's gone through here as well. And, you know, it's just brought out some really ugly stuff that I think people really need to know about. So thank you, you know, for sharing that. Surely, you know, can't touch you now. So
well, since my trial, they are looking into what ILSI has been doing around the world. And it turns out that ILSI controlled the dietary guidelines in 18 countries, all third world countries. So they target third world countries, and because it's much easier. It's easier to bribe people in these countries. I suspect.
Very sad.
Control. Yeah. Well, shouldn't use the word bribe, but it's used to use your money to get what you want to be done.
Very sad. So, you know, did you ever foresee, you know, I think it was Feeney and Volek, you know, that were the ones that sort of spoke to you via some book, you know, at a moment when you were needing to, or something was going on, you weren't well, you know, you were running marathons, yet still not well. I'm not sure if you'd already been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes then.
No, I hadn't. So the story there is, I know Steve Feeney very well from his research, because in 1984 he published a paper showing that if you could become fat adapted and not lose your exercise performance, which of course was completely contrary to what we believed, because in those days I was doing high carb diets, but when you raced you would do 3 days of a low carb diet, so you'd eat no carbs for 3 days, and you basically couldn't exercise because we weren't adapted. So when people said you can't exercise on a low-carb diet, we said, well, we know that. We've experienced it ourselves. And then he did this experiment where he had people do it for 6 weeks. They did a low-carb diet, and their performance was relatively good. So I knew Steve Feeney. Now, the key was that one of the greatest of South African triathletes, Paula Newby-Fraser, who won the Ironman in Hawaii 8 times. She won it 8 times. Now, in 1984, she read that paper and she phoned me from California where she was living and training. And she said, Tim, I've just read this article by Steve Feeney. Do you think I should go on a high-fat diet? So I said, Paula, I really think that's a good idea. Now, notice it was high-fat. We didn't talk about low carbs. We didn't say you must cut all the carbs. So she did that, and then she became the world's greatest triathlete. And when she retired and she came back to see me in Cape Town, she said, Tim, you know, that advice was the best advice I received in my entire career. She's convinced that I set her up to win all these Ironman triathlons. I said, but Paula, I never told you to cut the carbs. I just said add a bit of fat. But she did that beautifully. She did lots of fat and very little carbs. So I had this personal connection with Steve. And then one day I had just written the book Waterlogged and sent it off. And that was a 30-year expose of this overfeeding, overdrinking, and how that killed people and so on. And I'd been targeted for that as well. And I'd essentially stopped going to American College of Sports Medicine, where I was a fellow and everything. But because I was so badly treated there, because I was acting against their interests, and I was demonized as being the guy who's going to kill everyone because he's saying you must become dehydrated and so on, which was not what I was saying. So the night I wrote the book and sent the final edition off to the publishers in the US, I woke up and my body said, you must run tomorrow morning and not stop running. So I did get run, and I had a terrible run. And I came home and I opened my emails, and there was the advert for Steve's book. And I couldn't, and I went, I looked at it, I got so angry. I must tell you, I was angry. Because it said you must eat saturated fat and so on, and you must cut the carbs. And I said, but how can Feeney sell out to Dr. Atkins? Because Dr. Atkins, the name of the book was The New Atkins for the New You. So I said, how can you sell out to Atkins? So I went in a rage to the local booksellers, and I bought the book. It was the last copy. I came home, and after 2 hours, I said, oops, Feeney, I think you're right. I think
2 hours.
And I said, that's it. No more carbs. And so I cut the carbs at lunchtime. And that was the last time I had carb meal, was that day. Haven't eaten, high carb meals since then. And within 3 days, I felt like a new man. And I suspect, because I wasn't testing at that time, I suspect I was quite frankly diabetic. And then, of course, if you cut carbs, in a few days, you're going to start feeling better. And then in 6 weeks, my running went back 20 years. I went back to being a 40-year-old, although I was 60. And this is a miracle. It was frankly a miracle. And so you can imagine, I came from being not at death's door, but unhealthy and fat, and lethargic and unathletic, to being what I had been 20 years before. So I'm obviously going to think it's a miracle. And I'm obviously going to want to share it with other people.
But you never would have imagined the backlash that happened, surely.
My wife says, but surely you should have realized it was going to happen. And
really? She's so clever.
That's right. In fact, she's the cleverest person I've ever met. And I tell her that frequently. Yeah. So, and I mean it too. She has wisdom that I don't have, and she has the ability to remember things. I mean, she literally remembers day to day what we did 50 years ago. So she's got an incredible mind. So I've got a mind for science and facts, but she has a mind for other things. And so I didn't expect it. But I said, but I'm only trying to help people, and I'm just setting myself up as an example. And then I started to get attacked. And it's been remorseless pretty much since then.
Has it settled down now, though?
Well,
only because you're not. Yeah, sorry, I was just saying you're not, and you don't have those people around now, but you've obviously got a huge support from around the world now too. Yeah. But do you feel that love more than the other?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely, I do. But I'm always going to focus on the criticisms because that's my personality, but not take it personally. I just attack the people. If they're going to criticize me, they better have good reasons for saying it. So no, I mean, it's completely different now. For about 6 months after the trial was over and we'd had the decisions, if you spoke about the trial, my stomach would go in a knot and I'd get this funny feeling. But now it's gone. I mean, I can talk to you absolutely openly about the trial. It's like it happened to somebody else. I wasn't part of it. I'm well past it now.
Oh, that's really
I think
good.
the frustration I have is that the reason I got into trouble throughout my life was because I saw the future before other people saw it. And what frustrates me now is that the medical profession in the management of chronic disease, I'm not talking about acute management. Medicine's brilliant in managing acute conditions, but chronic disease, we're utterly, completely hopeless. And they can't see it. And the evidence is all before them that medicine must collapse. It must crash because the diabetes and obesity rates are rising so much. And you can't fund that. It's going to destroy the medical insurance companies and so on. And governments are trying to provide medical care for their patients. It's just not going to happen. And it's so obvious, but no one will do anything about it. That's my frustration now.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of seen a lot. I mean, I'm obviously seeing a much different picture to you, but in the last sort of 5-6 years, it seems to have had some change. I mean, I still think the majority, certainly here in Australia, we're very much still tied to, the medical model and, the dietary guidelines and all that. But have you seen some sort of signs that things may shift, and where do you think that's going to come from?
Yeah, I'm often asked this question, but in South Africa, what's happened is we have a Facebook page called the Banting 7-Day Meal Plan Facebook page, which was started by a lady who obviously I'd converted to the diet. And she has now 2 million members on this Facebook page. And Facebook phone her and say, how did you get 2 million followers? It's like, because it's more than any of the political parties in South Africa and so on. And she says it's simple. I just help people. And I treat them with respect. And so we've got all these people who are morbidly obese or were once upon a time morbidly obese or very obese, and we just treat them with respect. And we've changed their lives. And now she just produced a cookbook from the best recipes from all the people who are part of it. And it's just become the bestseller in South Africa. And in fact, it's highly rated and so on. But that tells me where we're really making an impact. We're making a huge impact. And the majority of those people don't look like me, white males in a upper middle class community. It's across the board in South Africa, which is very, very exciting. So this message is getting out, but it's bottom up. And I think the doctors are slowly realizing that they have to change, because so many of the patients are coming and saying, listen, I can't listen to you. You're not giving me the right advice. I've always said that social media this is what I tell the medical students. I said, if in 10 years' time you don't cure your patients of chronic diseases, they will go somewhere else, because on Twitter they will find someone who's cured and they will follow that person's advice. And it doesn't matter what you do, unless you are curing them, you're going to be out of business. So I think that we're on the cusp of a big change.
And you've got your Eat Better South Africa that you must be very proud to run. I mean, you must have seen such an impact with that, because that's reaching out, isn't it, to people in the poorer, areas of South Africa? Absolutely.
And the results are dramatic, because these are the communities that are the worst hit with not just poverty, but crime and everything. And we give these ladies, particularly we focused on women, we give them the right to believe they can control their lives. They can control their diabetes. They can control their hypertension. They can control their obesity. And that is so rewarding. And within weeks, they start to feel better and positive. And so it's been very, very exciting. And we're just about to invest a lot of money, which we've made on the Nutrition Network, which I'm glad I know you are part of it.
Yes.
But we promised to invest the money from the Nutrition Network into the Eat Better South Africa campaign. And we've just got a nice lot of money which we can invest in what we're going to do this year. So we have had some fantastic programs, and we're going to expand it. And we would love to turn an entire community around. And that would be the goal. What again is so difficult is that local government, they just don't see it. And you wonder why not. So that's so surprising.
Yeah, fantastic. So I just wanted to ask you a question about your, just backtrack a little bit about your Law of Running book. I remember seeing, was it either a video you were talking about how you took that section in that book on carbs and you ripped it out? So how did that feel, and what was that, I mean, obviously I know why you did it, but...
Well, I'm a sort of a religious guy, so that's, in fact, everything I tore out is factually correct, but it's just wrongly interpreted. That's an interesting point. The stuff I tore out was not wrong. It was wrong, but the facts are as they stand. They were not wrong, but the way we interpreted them, because we had interpreted them, everything according to this reductionist model, that carbohydrates were essential. And if you're carbohydrate adapted, what I've written there is true. But if you're fat adapted, which is the better model, it's untrue. So that was the basis. But I must tell you how important that event was. So I did it for a guy called Donal O'Neill, who produced a video called The Serial Killers. And he came to Cape Town because he wanted to go on the high-fat diet. And so he produced a video of his life experiences with us when he was on a high-fat diet. And then part of it was me tearing it out. He said it, Tim, here's the book, just tear this out. So I was happy to do that because I'm making a point. And so I did that. And then by chance, he was in California and he showed it to a guy called Sami Inkinen. Now, Sami is a genius, absolute genius. He started the Virta Health Company, but he hadn't started the Virta Health Company when he saw me do it. And so Sami was about to row across the Pacific with his wife or his girlfriend to decide whether they should get married. And they figured if they could cope with 46 days together on this boat, and if everything went well, then they would get married. Because you have to understand, Sami's a genius, and not only that, he's a physical genius. Also, he's a brilliant athlete. But his wife outrode him, you see. So she must be pretty competent as well. So anyway, Donal went overseas to film what they were doing, etc. And there he had Steve Feeney telling Sami, listen, it doesn't matter, you don't need carbs, you can go on a completely carbohydrate-free, which was what the whole thing became about. Sami saw me tearing this out and he said, but I trained according to law of nutrition, or law of running. And he's a world-class triathlete. If Tim Noakes said carbohydrates are no longer any good, he must have a reason. Shortly thereafter, Steve Feeney asked him to please support them doing a study of a low carbohydrates in the reversal of diabetes. Because Eric Westman, who was a great friend, of course, part of the triad, had done a study in 2004, a small study of about 30 people. And they'd managed to reverse diabetes in a large number, and about 15 of them. And so he said, listen, but we only had 15, and we need 100. So Sami went away reportedly that night, and he came back the next morning. He said, no, we're not going to do 50. We're going to do 100 million. And so he started the Virta Health Company. And so when I went to see Virta Health and Sami in California, he gave me a little note saying, thanks for the inspiration. So that I feel very proud of, that maybe I helped contribute to the Virta Health, because the Virta Health study is the game changer. It's completely changed everything. Now people can't say there are no data to show that it's able to reverse type 2 diabetes on a low carb diet.
And they must be close to are they close to the number?
The 100 million.
Yeah, 100 million. No, not quite. It'll get there.
But what they raised $100 million this last year to expand the study. So they're going amazingly well. Yeah. And their selling point is, if we don't bring your diabetes under control, you don't have to pay us anything.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. And yet, governments around the world would continue to not pay it any attention.
No, but they have to in due course. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure if you're aware, well, you probably wouldn't be aware, but I've got a program here that I've teamed up with Dr. Jackie Montefiore, who's a Brisbane GP, low carb GP, and we run a group, online group program where we help, people with making the low carb lifestyle switch. And I was talking to her and saying that I was going to be chatting to you and saying I was all nervous and blah, blah, blah. And I said, did you have any questions? What do you think I should ask? So do you mind if I ask? She had a question about cholesterol. So I thought,
sure,
I'll see. Yeah. So this is what she said. So she said if she ever had the chance to talk to you, she would ask a gazillion questions about cholesterol. Is it a problem? Why do some highly intelligent experts swear it is until they're blue in the face? Then equally intelligent people will argue just as hard that it is not. She'd love to know your take on that.
Okay, well, my full answer, you can find it on the CrossFit website, because there I'm writing a series of articles called It's the Insulin Resistance Stupid.
Yes.
So what I did was, when I started the series, I didn't know where it would lead. And I said, I just want to understand what is insulin resistance. So I went right back to the first studies in the 1950s, where people were talking about insulin resistance. And it turns out that the first studies in the 1950s of diabetic patients, of people with heart disease, showed that they were much more likely to have high triglycerides than high cholesterol. And so the first people researching the question said it's triglycerides that are causing heart disease, not cholesterol. They then discovered that carbohydrates drive the triglycerides. And so we had this thing called carbohydrate-sensitive hypertriglyceridemia. And that was the model of disease in the 1950s. Then along comes this guy, Ansel Keys, and I describe at great length on these columns that he was a guy who was very famous during the Second World War. He did a study on starvation, which was a magnificent study, but he suddenly didn't know what to do. And at the end of the war, he was left. He was a physiologist. He had no medical training. He had no training in lipids or fats. But all of a sudden, this big bunch of money came available to study heart disease research. And he was clever enough to realize, I have to get in there. But he had no training. He was absolutely without training. There was a guy called John Goffman who had already shown that when he centrifused blood, that you could break it up into the VLD, the LDL, the HDL, and he was the first guy to do that. And he said there are two abnormalities in heart disease. The one, people have high triglycerides, which was the VLDL, and the other ones have the high LDL. And he said there are two mechanisms. The one is fat in the diet, and the other one is carbohydrates in the diet. Keys came along without any training and usurped his ideas, but he dropped the carbohydrate side. He said, no, it's all the fat in the diet. And all he had a diagram from the World Health Organization showing saturated fat in the diet and heart disease rates. And he said, and there was this line, which he then reduced 22 countries to 6, and he produced a straight line graph. And then he became dominant. And he became dominant because the government and industry and the National Institute of Health and the American Heart Association got behind him. What should have happened is they should have said there are two theories. The one is that carbohydrates are driving heart disease through triglycerides. The other is that fat is driving the disease through cholesterol. And they should have funded both streams equally. They didn't. They dropped the insulin story, the insulin triglyceride story, and they went with cholesterol. And then it became a bureaucratic decision that they'd invested so much money that they couldn't be wrong. And I'm now writing the next 8 columns on this, and it is astonishing. I've gone back from 1910 right up till 2018 with the Virta Health study. The lie, after lie, after lie, after lie to sustain it was unbelievable. Cholesterol was never linked to heart disease. It never was. There was never any evidence. But because and ironically, the only evidence came when the statins came along and they reduced cholesterol, and they marginally reduced heart disease rates, but they did not reduce mortality. They didn't reduce the statins do not reduce mortality. You simply die of something else. But they just hid that. And they said, well, you see, it reduced the risk. And the risk reduction is like 1 in 100. And my engineering friends say, imagine if I took a medical student and said, okay, you've got $100,000, whatever, to buy a car. Here are 100 cars. Amongst these 100 cars, there's one that works. But you're just going to have to choose which one you like, and you must give me your money. And that's what statins is all about. You give me your money, and you take the risk that 1 out of 100 is going to benefit. I mean, how can the profession do it? So that's the first point. But what I've uncovered in this series, it is unethical. And I repeat this, it is completely unethical for any medical doctor or any dietitian to tell a patient to eat less saturated fat, to remove saturated fat from the diet. And why is it unethical? Because there have been 3 clinical trials, which we accept. When there's a randomized controlled trial, we accept the findings. There were 3, they all show exactly the same outcome. They cost $1 billion of US taxpayers' money to prove that if you remove saturated fat from the diet, your mortality goes up and your diseases go up, particularly diabetes, etc. So therefore, on the first principle in medicine, first do no harm. Any doctor who tells a patient to take saturated fat out of the diet is acting unethically, and we have to get that message across. So that's the key. And so what I found was that the best diagram I can give is that there's a triad, 3 things. It's got 3 legs. And this is the heart disease model. The model is that you have high-fat diet causes raised cholesterol, which causes increased heart disease. Now, for that to be true, you have to prove every single component must be true in every study. And it's never been shown. No, there's not one study finding all 3. So what they do, for example, in Keyes's 7-country study, they managed to find that 2 of the legs seemed to have some support, but the 3rd leg didn't. And the 3rd leg was the critical one. It's never been shown in a now listen very carefully to this. It's never been shown in a population that the dietary fat determines the blood cholesterol concentration. It's never been shown. If you take 10 people and put them in the laboratory for 8 weeks, you can get the cholesterol to go down if you feed them polyunsaturated fats. But in a community, that has never, ever been shown. It has never been shown that people with heart disease eat a higher saturated fat diet. Never been shown. So and that's the key. The key to the Keyes hypothesis is that eating saturated fat, which raises your cholesterol. If that is not true, then the model is dead. And the model is dead because it's never been shown. And so what Keyes and his group do, and these people who convince you must take a statin and your cholesterol is important, they'll tell you a study which has got one of the 3 legs intact. But they won't tell you actually it didn't have the other 2 legs weren't intact, so the model doesn't work. So the reality is atherosclerosis by itself is not the key driver of heart disease. It's what happens when the atherosclerosis plaque ruptures. And no one addresses that. And that is due to other mechanisms unrelated to what happened to cause the plaque. So the plaque is built up, but then the thing ruptures. And that's what kills you, is the rupture. And that has never been addressed in any of these studies. What's causing the rupture?
Wow, I think that's a pretty good answer. And I'm definitely going to put the CrossFit website down below as well and link all that to that, because it's just astounding. It just doesn't matter how many times I hear it. I've heard you speak about it in the Nutrition Network programs, that I've done, and it still blows my mind. Statins was something that they put my mother on. She had an embolism and nearly died. Thankfully didn't, about 5 years ago, and of course was put on every drug under the sun. Which thankfully she's now off every drug under the sun because of, she's changed her diet. But the statins were the one drug that she actually said to me, Tracey, if this is life, I don't want to live anymore. It made her feel so bad. And she's just, no, there was no way she was going to do it. But I think, as I get, people, are scared, if they go to a doctor and the doctor says, look, this is what you need to go on, for most people, they're just going to follow what their doctor says. It's scary.
And what the doctor's saying is criminal because it's not true. That's the sad, if you have high cholesterol, the mortality is so low every year. It's unbelievably low. The probability that you'll be alive in 10 years is still 90%, 95, 99%. And the patients are told you're going to drop dead if you walk out of my surgery and don't take your medications. It's completely wrong.
Well, I often say to people that, it is people dying of heart attacks. You actually look at their cholesterol level, it's very low. Exactly. And they're like, what? No. I'm like,
exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. And I'm realizing, looking at the time, I'm going to have to let you go, but I do have one question for you, if
Sure.
I can end with this question, is, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I would just like to see the low-carb diet become the prescribed diet for the majority of people, particularly those with insulin resistance, because it is so life-changing. I experienced that life-changing. And my legacy was my father allowed me to do what I've done because of what he had done. He generated enough income that he allowed me to be able to do what I wanted to do. And he died of this disease, and I watched him die of type 2 diabetes. And it was a terrible, terrible death. And if I'd known what I know today, we could have spared him all of that. And so I would just like to save a few people from that indignity that he went through, because dying of diabetes is very, very, it's the worst possible disease. It's so demeaning, and that's the best word to describe it. And people just don't understand. They think I can have my insulin resistance, I can eat my carbs, and I can use the insulin, and it doesn't work. Eventually, you're going to run into trouble. So I'd like my legacy to be remembered as one of the people who helped change and make people realize that insulin resistance is a really serious condition, but it's easy to treat. And if you just eat low carbs, you'll be fine. So perhaps the final statement would be that I realize diabetes is not, it's a disease of behavior. It's a disease of choice. It's not a disease that's progressive and relentless. You can choose to control it very easily. And that means just change your diet, cut out the carbs. The carbs are what's toxic for you. And once you do that, you'll be fine.
Well, thank you so much. It was a great place to end it. And I can't thank you enough. It's been an absolute pleasure, and what an honor. Thank you. And I'm very sure that that's going to be your legacy, because I know that you've already helped, so many people, and there's so many more years to come where you'll be able to help more. So, and to look forward to the next book, and
Yes,
another book we can buy and read it.
Thanks, Tracey. Thank you very much for a lovely interview. I really appreciate your kindness and your thoughtfulness and your interesting questions and your vibrancy and the way you conducted it. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.